Hello everyone. Good evening, guys. The Zoom meeting got ended, so I had to log into Zoom application. I had to extend the meeting, and only after that I was able to start the meeting for today. So there was a bit of delay because of that. So the meeting got ended. I had to extend it in Zoom. So yes, let's pick it up from where we have left off in our previous session. So we are working on the ERP AR invoice application, and this is how our application is looking like at this point in time. And I would also open up the application I created for a previous batch here, and I'm going to use it for reference. Let me log into this instance from here. I'm going into Vbcs. I'll open up the AR invoice application I've created for a previous batch here. 62. Yeah, so this is how our AR invoice application is looking like at this point. So yes, we created the application. We've added the landing page to our application, and on the landing page, we're displaying the list of invoice requests created by that particular user. Now, we added these two invoices from a backend, right? So we added these two invoices from the backend, right? We went to the business object and we added a record manually from there. But how does user enters the invoice details, guys? Usually, we need to give them a CRUD functionality, so that we should give them an option to create an invoice, edit it, and delete it as well. So let's go ahead and add a create invoice page to the application now. And yes, user should be able to pick the customer, and other details should get defaulted. So first of all, let's add this create invoice page to the application with these 8 fields added to it first. So how are we going to do it? We would select the table, go to quick start, add a create page, and we need to select the fields. Customer is going to be the reference field, transaction date. So you have to add the fields row wise, not column wise. And you need to select the bill to customer number, payment terms, business unit, transaction type, currency code, and the transaction source. Currency code and the transaction source. And as usual, a page gets created with this title, and on this page, these fields get added to it. And to access this page, this button would be placed on top of the table. Now I select the toolbar, and I'm going to add in one line break before and after this. See, the toolbar is in this particular div element. I'm adding one line break before and after that. And I'm going to make this button appear in a call to action, appear as a call to action, go into live mode and launch the page. And we need to do the usual fine tuning, select the entire form layout. Put in one line break before and after it. And I want to fine tune the labels. And we can go ahead and, we can change this one as well. The transaction source, that's fine. It would show up as in a single line. That's okay. So if you see this page, normally whenever you add a create invoice page, right, there are a few things that usually clients ask for. So the first thing they might say is, client might say is, Prasad, can you please default these values onto these three fields? A payment terms has to be 30net, transaction type has to be invoice, transaction source should be manual. So I need to default these three values on these three fields. How do you default them? So you need to understand to which variable and what field this UI component is binded to. So you see the payment terms is binded to the invoice variable. So on the page, there is a variable called invoice, and that invoice variable has payment terms. So whatever value is entered in that UI field would be stored in this. So if I want to display some default value on the UI element, I just have to add it as a default value here. And I need to default transaction type as invoice. I need to default the transaction type as invoice. And the transaction source as manual. Okay, payment terms as 13. Now, if you go back to the page designer, what do you see? You see these default values showing up on the page. And we can also, so usually, yes, the requirement would be something like this, like default a value and leave them editable, leave them as editable fields so that user can change them if required, update them if required. Otherwise, user would leave it as is. Now, if client says Prasad transaction type should always be invoice. Yes, let the user be able to update a payment terms or a source, but not the type. What do you do in such case, guys? You can leave these two as editable fields, but the transaction type you can mark it as a read-only field. You can put in the transaction type as read-only field. Okay. And also clients might ask you to do something like this. Like we are seeing customer as a drop-down here, right? And yes, user will be picking up a customer from the drop-down. I might pick up easy solutions. So the client would say that based on a customer that is selected here, so whatever customer is selected here, that particular customer details need to be fetched, and those details should be assigned to the variables, assigned to the next three variables that you see on page. Just give me one moment, guys. Yeah. So based on a customer that we select, or based on the customer that is selected in the dropdown here, we need to go to the customer definition, get the customer number, business unit, and currency code. And we need to display those fields. We need to display, or we need to assign those fields here. How do we achieve it, guys? So first of all, and this needs to happen every time the customer is changed. So not only when the customer is selected initially, even whenever there is a change in the customer, we have to get the customer details. We have to get the customer details, and we need to get the customer details, and we need to assign it to variables on the page. Okay, so how do we do it? So we go to the, to achieve that behavior, we need to go to the select box here, and we need to add an event here called on value item event. And what does it mean? So we call this as customer value item chain. So whenever value in the customer drop down changes, this action chain would be executed. And what exactly do you want to perform in here? You want to call a REST API. You want to call a REST API. And what REST API do you want to call? If you go into customer business object, You're able to see 5 endpoints in here. You're able to see 5 endpoints in here. And another important point here is guys, when you select a customer in the drop-down here, it is not the customer name. Yes, you're seeing the customer name in the front end, but it is the customer ID that gets stored in the back end. Even though you're seeing the name in the front end, it's actually the ID that gets stored in the back end. So I've got customer ID with me and I need to get the customer details. So which endpoint would help you with it, guys? Customer ID, and I need to get the details. So this is the endpoint that I have to call. Yes or no, guys? Get customer by ID. So I need to call that REST API here. Here. So I say call REST. And I'm going to select that endpoint. Get customer by ID. And I need to map the customer ID. So whatever you see as key here, this is nothing but the customer ID. That is nothing but the customer ID. And once you get the customer, so we are making a REST API call, and the result of this REST API call would be stored in this variable. Now, to check if this REST API call is successful or not, I have to drop in an if condition here. And I need to check if this result variable, I need to check if that result variable, so this is a REST API response. And in the REST API response, you see OK. And this is a Boolean value. So if the REST API call is successful, you would have true in here. And if the REST API fails, or if there's some problem with it, you would have a value of false here. So you click on OK. So the moment you click on OK here, so we are looking at this result and checking if it is OK or not. Meaning if the REST API call is successful. And what exactly do we want to do if that REST API call was successful? We want to read the customer details and we want to assign it to variables from the page. We want to read the customer details and we want to assign it to variables on the page. Okay, so what are the variables that we want to assign values to? So I want to assign values to, if we go back in here, so I want to initialize the bill to customer depot, business unit, and currency code. So how do you get that? So you search for bill to customer number. And where do you get the value from? So you look at the REST API call response, you see a customer number in it. And I also want to assign or initialize a business unit as well. And I also want to assign value to the currency code field. Okay, so this is exactly what we wanted to do. Whenever a customer changes based on a customer number, we want to, yes, we're calling a REST API to get the customer details based on customer ID. Based on customer ID, we're getting the customer details. And we're also checking if that REST API call was successful or not. We're also checking if that REST API call is successful or not. And if that REST API call is successful, we are reading the response and we are assigning the result of that REST API call to the variables on the page. Now let's see this in action. If I go back to Page Designer, I go into live mode. I'm going to select a customer here, Easy Solutions, and that particular customer details would be defaulted here. Now I go into McNally products, I see McNally products getting displayed here. Okay, so bill to customer number, remember it is not an amount. So we don't have to show the 1000 separator, we can take it off. And also we can go ahead and make these 3 fields as read-only fields, because these 3 fields should be driven by the customer selection here. So let's see this in action now. I have an option to create an invoice. Create it. I'll select a customer here. The other values get defaulted. And I'm going to pick a transaction date and hit the save button. Now, the moment I hit the save button, what should happen? The customer details should be saved. Sorry, the invoice details should be saved. And we should also see a confirmation message at the top. Go ahead and hit the save button. You see that the invoice is saved. You see a confirmation message, but invoice number is not printed there. So we need to fix that. And we also see that the status is also not defaulted. So when our invoice is created, we want the status to be defaulted as requested. That's one change that we want to do first. And the second change that we want is, yes, status to be defaulted as requested. Second change is we need to fix the notification. So how do we do it? Let's fix the notification first. Where is the notification coming in from? When we hit the save button, it is coming in from here. So it's creating invoice by calling a REST API first, and after the invoice is created successfully, we're firing off a confirmation message. Okay, so I'm printing invoice created successfully. Okay, we fine tune the notification message. And another important point is we want the invoice to be created with a default status as requested, right? So when I added this create invoice page, we only selected 8 fields here. But I want to add one additional field here. So how do we do it? You know very well what happens in the background, right? There is a data type created with those fields, and a variable was created with that data type. And you have these fields in that variable. Now I go to that data type and I'm going to add, I'll say edit from endpoint, and I'm going to add a status field here. I'm going to add a status field here. Now you go into variables, and on the status field, remember this is a value. Yeah, you would be able to see that field showing up on the variable by default because it is created of that data type. And I can also add a default value as well. Okay, and I'm setting up a default value as requested here. I'm setting up a default value as requested here. And remember, this is something that we want to default, and user need not enter value into it. If it is a field that user has to enter value into it, then we can add in an input text field, and I could have binded it to that UI component that I have added. So I could have binded it to a field that I added in the background, so that whatever value that I have assigned default value, that would be showing up here. So if you want a user to enter a value in a particular field, this is what we can do. This is what we can do. Okay. And apart from this save, we don't want to, we don't want to, and we don't want user to enter a value here. Okay, it's not required because we just want to default it. We just want to default it. So in such case, I can take this off completely, and it would be handled in the background automatically. So if I go ahead and create an invoice now, it would be created with the status as requested. You can also go ahead and add a delete page as well. Go into design. Add a delete page. I can pick up this invoice, delete it, and I can create another one. I'll pick up Easy Solutions customer. I'm going to pick up a transaction date. I'm going to hit the save button. So the moment you hit the save button, you see the message populated there at the top. Invoice 27 created, and you also see the status showing up as requested. Fine. Now we want to add the edit invoice here. Now that is where all the complication is. So we will add the edit invoice page. We say edit invoice. And what are the fields we want to see on the edit invoice page, guys? We want to just pick up that invoice, pick up an invoice, and we say edit invoice. And on this page, yes, it is a master detail page that we want to create. And yes, in the header section, we want to display the invoice details, invoice header details. And in the line section, we want to display the invoice line details. So let's add the header section first, wherein we want to display the invoice details. And what details of the invoice do you want to display here, guys? So whatever 8 fields that you have on the create page, we need to display those 8 fields. And apart from those 8 fields, we also want to display the amount fields, the discount percentage, total amount, and the discounted amount. And we also have to print the invoice ID or a reference because it is generated now, right? So when the invoice is created, the I reference was generated. So let's add these 12 fields.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just one thing. As we have created the create invoice page, so these create lines also should not come at the create invoice page.
Oh, it doesn't come in there. Usually when you need to create and save an invoice first, and then you would be able to perform a CRUD operations on the lines from here.
All right.
So we add the discount as a percent field here. Bill to customer number, payment terms, total amount. It's a currency field. Business unit, transaction type, discounted amount. That's going to be currency field again. Currency code, transaction source, and the invoice. So I need 12 fields. I've selected all of them. And we can change the fields as well. So if it's becoming difficult for you to move them around, so I can select this button. I'm in a toolbar. I see 3 buttons in there. I can cut the second one and paste it in seconds in the second place. I've cut the third button and I'm pasting it in the second place now. I'll go to the live mode. I'm going to select an invoice and edit it. We need to do the usual fine tuning here. Select the form layout, and I want to have a 3-column layout here. And we also need to do the usual fine tuning. Now, if you see here, first of all, yeah, let me change the labels a little bit. So if I go ahead and make it live, yeah, let me go ahead and launch the application. So you see the application now. I have one invoice here. I can pick up any of the invoice here. I'm going to edit it. So I'm able to see the invoice details here. Now, if you look at the invoice details, I added 12 fields to the page, right? I selected these 12 fields and I wanted to display them on the page. And you can also shorten this table a little bit. That's going into the second line. Now, when you so if you look at this page now, so it's a 3-column layout. But out of these 12 fields that I have added to the page, out of these 12 fields that I have added to the page, 3 fields got added as read-only fields. Out of 12 fields, 3 fields got added as read-only fields. Why are these three fields added as read-only fields? What's the reason? The first reason is, yes, why is invoice ID or reference added as a read-only field? There's any guess?
That's unique so
Because
that nobody can change.
it's a primary key, and so what VBCS says is, okay, Prasad, if you want to display it on a page, I'll let you do it, but I don't want user to edit it. Common sense, and it's obvious as well. Okay, this is fine. Now, if you look at total amount and discounted amount, why do you see these fields added as read-only fields? The reason is, on the total amount field and the discounted amount field, there is a value calculation logic in place. Now, what's the calculation logic we have put on total amount field? The logic that we have put on total amount field is, we said, we asked VBCS to sum up the line totals. Okay, so we asked VBCS to sum up the line totals and display it as an invoice total. Okay, so where did we mention that? So if you go into invoice business object, and if you go to, what's the field, guys? Total amount field. Yeah, total amount. And you see that there is an aggregation logic in place. So what is it that I'm asking OIC to do? I'm asking OIC to sum up or total the line totals. So whatever lines are there on the invoice, sum up the line totals. Sum up the line totals. Okay. So if an invoice has two lines, those two lines, line totals would be summed up, and that would be displayed as a total amount here. Okay. So whenever you have a value calculation logic in place, so this is like we are asking VBCS to do the calculation on our behalf. And when you add such fields where you have value calculation to a page, VBCS lets you add them, but it would add them as read-only fields. So that's why this field is added as read-only field, because you have an aggregation logic in place. Okay. Now, if you see, say for example, you see a field like payment term, we don't have any value calculation logic. Value calculation logic is none. So since it is none, the field is added as editable field. Okay, payment terms field is added as editable field. Okay, so that's why. So if you and so the total amount is fine. Why is discounted amount added as a read-only field here? But the reason why read-only discounted amount field is added as read-only field is there is a calculation logic in place again. So what's the calculation logic that we have for discounted amount? So we are saying we've put in an expression there. We said calculate amount with a formula. So it is total amount of the invoice into 1 minus discount percentage. Total amount into 1 minus discount percentage. So it is 5,000 into 1 minus 0.2. 5,000 into 0.8. 5,000 into 0.8. It would be 4,000. So it is this total amount into 1 minus discount percentage that's giving us a discount amount. Okay. So since we have a value calculation logic in place for discounted amount as well, plus the total amount, these two fields are added as read-only fields, including the invoice ID. Now the reason why we are getting this, why these three fields are added, we know now why these three fields are added as read-only fields, right? So this is fine with us. But if I make some change on the invoice, so let's say I change the date to today's date, I'm going to save the invoice. So when I save the invoice, I'm getting an exception here. And what does the exception say? Exception says, error says there is some problem with the discounted amount column. Now the error message is not obvious here. It's not very descriptive. But the reason why you're getting this error is you have these three fields added as read-only fields, which means user cannot change them. But still, since I added this edit invoice page to the application using quick start option, How did I add this page to the application? I've done it using quick start option. Since I added this page using a quick start option to the application, by default, when you hit the save button, update invoice endpoint will be called because we are in edit invoice page. And to that update invoice, all these 12 fields will be passed as 4 plus 4 plus 4. 12 fields will be passed as input. Okay. But what is it that we should ideally pass as input to the save button? We should only update the 11 fields here. These 3 fields are something that we should not update. So what is it that we have to do? So if you look at the save button, action chain, you see update invoice is being called, and to the update invoice endpoint, the entire page invoice variable is being passed as. Now, how many fields do you have on this variable?
12.
You have 12 fields. Now, out of these 12, I want to pass only 9 as input here. Now, what is it that we already know, guys? So whenever you call a REST API in Vbcs, be it a create or update endpoint, you can only pass in a single payload variable. You can only pass in one variable as input. Remember, guys, if I probably have 12 fields here and 12 fields here as well, if I have 12 mappings, what I could have done, I could have easily taken off the mappings of ID, total amount, and discounted amount. But it is the variable mapping that's happening at the top level. So what is it that I have to do now? I need to do 3 simple steps, guys. I need to do 3 steps. I need to first create a data type of update endpoint. So I need to first create a data type of this endpoint. And I need to select only 9 fields when I do that. I need to create a data type of update invoice endpoint, picking up only the 9 fields that you want to update, excluding the amounts and the ID column. Excluding the amounts and the ID column. And we have to create a variable of that data type. We have to create a variable of that data type. And we need to initialize that variable. We need to assign values to that variable. And we need to pass that variable, which has only 9 fields, as input to update invoice REST API. Okay, so I go to the data types now, and I create a new data type. I say from endpoint, and I'm going to say update invoice endpoint. And what fields do we want to select here, guys? I'm going to say call update invoice data type. And I want to select these 9 fields. And the discount percentage. So I've selected 8 fields here, 9 fields here. And we also need to create a variable of that data type. We need to initialize that variable. Update invoice variable. And with what variable I want to update it? I want to update it with this invoice variable. So this invoice variable has 12 fields, but this update invoice variable that I created has only 9 fields. So whatever 9 fields that are matching between these two variables, so the fields values from in those 9 fields from this variable could be assigned to this. Now I need to go ahead and update that. I need to pass this variable as input here. So instead of passing in the invoice variable, which has 12 fields on it, I have to pass an update invoice variable as input, which has only 9 fields in it. You save it. Okay. Now you go ahead and launch the application. It should work absolutely fine. So if I go ahead and pick up invoice 23, I'm going to change the date to 24. And I'm updating the date to today, and you would save this. So the moment you save this, what would happen? The invoice gets saved. The moment you save this, invoice gets saved. You see a confirmation message at the top. Invoice is saved as well. And we see a confirmation message. So which means we're not getting that error anymore because we have excluded these 3 fields from getting passed as input to update invoice endpoint. And yes, we give user a provision to change the customer from the edit invoice screen as well. And when user changes a customer in the edit invoice screen, in this screen also, we want this field to drive these 3. So based on the selection you make in the customer, here these 3 fields should be updated. And these 3 should be read-only fields. Okay, otherwise it would lead to mismatch. So we go back and select these 3 fields. I'm putting in the same logic that I did earlier. Calling the get customer endpoint. And if that is okay, I'm going to assign a bill to customer number. Business unit. And the currency code. And we can also make this transaction type as a read-only. We only have the invoice header level details at the top, but we also want to give user permission to be able to uh, perform CRUD operations on the lines here. So we need to add the line section. So we would add a heading first. Add in a table. And I want to display the lines in that particular table. And what data do we want to display? We want to display the description, quantity, unit selling price, and we'll call this as currency, line total field. And we also want to display this as a currency. So I've displayed 4 fields related to the lines here in the table. And do we need to apply any filter here, guys? Because remember, without any filter, what would happen? Without any filter. So if you don't apply any filter, all the lines will be fetched, and all the lines will be displayed on all the invoices, right? So how do we? So let's see what happens if we don't apply any filter. What will happen? I'm seeing two lines here. So it looks like the description is same on both the lines, which is slightly confusing. So let's fix that. We go to the lines here. There are two lines here. The first line belongs to 23, second line belongs to 25. Let me just edit the description here. I'm saying invoice 23 line 1. And I'm selecting the second line now. And the second line, I'm going to add it as 25. I'm going to add it as 25. Launch the application. Okay. Now we go ahead and select the invoice, edit it. Select the invoice and edit it. Now you're able to see the lines here. So if you see here, I've selected invoice 23, but I'm seeing the line of lines of invoice 23 and 25. So ideally, I should have seen only the first line. So when I go to 25, I should have seen only the second line, but I'm seeing both the lines. And if I pick up 27, ideally, this section should be blank because these two lines don't belong to 27. So how do I fix this? To fix this, what I have to do is I need to go into edit invoice. I just have to select the table. And I can see where the data is coming in from. So the data is coming in from a receivable invoice line list STP. And we can go to that variable, receivables invoice line list STP or service data provider. And we need to apply a filter here. And what's a filter that I want to apply? I want to say, just don't show me all the lines. Show me only the lines whose invoice equals invoice ID you are viewing on page. Okay, so don't show me all the lines. Show me only the lines whose invoice, because on every line we have invoice IDs. Every line when saved, there will be an invoice ID with which it will be saved. So check the line invoice, and only if that line invoice is equal to the invoice we are editing on the page, display that lines. Now look at the application with that change in place now. We should be able to see only that particular invoice line showing up now. Only 25 is showing up in 25, 23 in 23, and so on. Now, if you see these lines, remember how did we add these lines, guys? I added this line from a backend so that it would help me when I do the application build. It would just help me understand whether I'm going in the right direction or not. But ideally, how would a client add the invoices or add the lines onto the invoice? So we need to give them a CRUD functionality here. So how do we do that? So I go ahead and select the line section here. Going to restart, add a create page. And what fields do we want to see on a create line page? You have invoice and product added by default. Invoice and product added by default. These are the reference fields. And you select unit selling price, description, line total. And line total, we want to display as currency, quantity. Unit selling price also, you can display it as a currency field. So I'm going to rename it, call it as create line. And I would also call this as main create invoice line. finish it. Go ahead and launch the application or launch this create line page. Let's do the usual fine tuning. Now, if you look at the application now, you would be able to see, yes, you can pick an invoice, edit it. I do have an option to create a line. Now, I'll look at what I'm doing is, first of all, as an end user, I'm picking up a specific invoice and I'm editing it. So which itself means that, yes, I'm editing invoice 23. And when I create a line, I of course want to add a line to invoice 23. When I add a line, I want to add a line to invoice 23 field. Okay, so if you ask me to select an invoice here again in the create line page, I get irritated, right? So as an end user, what would I say? Prasad, can't you handle it internally? I'm selecting an invoice here and I'm editing it. And it's common sense that when I hit the create line here, I want to add that line to invoice 23 itself. So how do I handle it? So what I need to do is on this page, and you also know very well how it works, right? So when you move from one page to another page in Vbcs, does the context get carried over, guys? Not really, right? So when you move from one page to another page, so the moment I go to create line page, this page would not know how or what invoice was selected in the previous one. Is it 23 or 27 or 25? We really don't know. So how do we handle it? The way we handle it is we go ahead and create a variable. So we go ahead and create a variable on this page, call it invoice, and we will mark it as required variable. So when you are navigating from one page, so like say, for example, when you're navigating from edit invoice page to the create line page, when you are navigating from edit invoice page to the create line page, what do? We need to pass in whatever invoice ID that we are editing here. So that line, that invoice, we should be able to pass it here. Okay. So how do we do that? So we're going to create invoice line page. I'm going to create a variable, call it invoice ID pass variable. And I'm going to pass in this variable from a previous page. And I'm going to say required variable pass on URL. Now, how am I navigating to this create line page, guys? I'm navigating to it from edit invoice page. So you're going to create line here. And in the create line page, what is it that you're seeing? So from the create line page, when we hit that button, so what's the button that we are hitting there in the create line page? So from the edit invoice page, we are hitting create line button. And the moment I hit that create line button, this action chain is getting executed. And in this action chain, we are navigating to create line page. Now that I have added a mandatory variable here, now that I have added a mandatory variable on this page, it's giving me an option to pass a value now. So I go ahead and pass an invoice ID as input here. Now, when you pass an invoice ID as input, what would happen now? So whatever invoice ID you see here, I'm passing that as input to this variable. And in this particular page, yes, that value would be saved in this variable. And I just want to assign that as a default value here. So whatever invoice ID you are receiving from previous page, I'm assigning it as a default value on the line here. I go back here. I don't need to see this in the front end. I'm going to delete it because it would be handled in the back end. And another change that client might ask you to do is, yes, the moment you select a product here, yes, I'm going to select a product. Based on a product, we need to get the description and USP. So based on the product that is selected, we need to get the description and USP and default it on the page. How do we do it? As usual, right? So how did we handle it in the customer? We would use the same approach. So you create an action chain and you call it as product value action chain. And I'm going to call it REST API. I would call it as get product by ID endpoint. And I'm going to pass in key as input here. Product ID as input. So this is going to get us back the product details. And as usual, we check if that REST API call was successful or not. And if that is successful, we want to assign values to the variables. And there are two things that we want to initialize with assign, which is a description and USP. We can select it as unit selling price. And in the unit selling price also, we enter a value here. Now, if I go into live mode, I should be able to select a product here. And the moment I select a product, you see the description and USP getting defaulted. Yes, user should be able to change the description, but not USP. So unit selling price, I'm going to mark it as read-only field. And also, yes, client might also ask you to implement this behavior. So yes, user would enter a quantity here. And the moment user enters a quantity here in tax mode, so we want this line total field to be calculated automatically. We wanted that line total field to be calculated automatically as a product of quantity and USP. How do we get this behavior, guys? And it should not be the initial default, guys. The moment I update, as soon as I change the quantity, this should be multiplied with unit selling price, and it should be displayed as line total, and it should be a non-editable field. It should be non-editable field. Okay. So how do we do this? You go into line total field, and at the moment, first of all, you make it read only because it should not be editable, and it should be calculated automatically as a product. So at the moment, this line total field is binded to the line total field in line variable. But when you need this sort of a behavior, like the value in a field should change as and when a value in a particular field changes, the moment I increment or decrement this, I want this value to update automatically. So in such case, how do we do it? We need to unhook this UI element from the line total field, and we need to write an expression here. And what sort of expression would you write, guys? You need to write an expression which is going to look something like this. So we need to check. So this is the expression that we need to write. So we need to check if quantity and, so this is a logical AND operator. So we need to check if quantity and our unit selling price are not null. So we need to check if both quantity and USP has values. We check if quantity and USP has values. We'll put a question mark, and question mark acts like a ternary operator. And if both these fields have values, so we would be displaying quantity into unit selling price, the product in that particular field. Otherwise, if either of them is blank, we would display a value of 0. Okay, so I'm checking if two fields have a value or not, quantity and USP. And if both of them have a value, I'm using a ternary operator. And if this condition is true, I want to multiply these two fields and display the product in the line total field. Otherwise, I want to display a value of 0. Okay, so how do I do this? Copy this. I go into line total and I'm writing in the expression. So what do you see now? You see 0 here. So the moment I go into live mode and I'm going to put into here, tab out, you see the value changes. And the moment I see 3 here, I see the value changes here. So this is fine. So this value, since I have put in an expression here, remember whenever you put an expression here, this ensures that the value that you see in this field changes as and when you change the quantity. That's fine. And another important point is this value, the value that is calculated as a result of this expression, would only be displayed here on the page, and this value will not be saved on the line total field. So when I save the line, it is not going to save it internally. So let me show you that. So I'm going to pick this particular invoice. I'm going to create another line. I'm going to create a line. And when I create a line, this time I'm going to pick license. And I'm going to say license fees. And let's say I need one license. The total is 1000 here. But when I save it, remember this is a display only field that I have, right? So I have written an expression here on the field. So this expression would display the value here. But please note that this value will not be saved in the line total field. Okay, so you see the line is saved, but the line total field is blank. Why is line total field blank, guys? Because this line, so when you hit the save button, I'm passing these 4 fields as input to the create line endpoint, but the line total field is blank because this is no longer linked to the line total field. So to fix this, what do we need to do? We need to go into line total field, sorry, the save button, go to the action chain, see where the line is getting saved. And before the line is getting saved, you need to add one assign action here. And what value do you need to add? Unit selling price. And how are you going to get a value per unit selling price? You would write an expression here and you say quantity into USP. So whenever a line is saved, we want the line to be saved as a product of quantity and USP. Okay, and that should be assigned to the, not to the line in unit selling price, guys, it's a line total field. Now that we are assigning values to the line total field, I'm assigning the quantity of, sorry, the product of quantity and USP to a line total variable. So if I go ahead and save the line, it should work fine because I'm initializing the line total variable as well. Why do I have to do this, guys? Because I have unhooked that UI element. This UI element is no longer linked with line total anyways because it's just an expression there. Now I need to fix this as well. So I'll just say line created successfully or line saved successfully. And I can also go ahead and add the delete line page as well. We launch the application. Now, if you go to the invoice 23, I'm going to pick this one up. I'm going to delete it. Now, let me go ahead and add another line here. Now, if I add another line, so for example, if I add license fee now, what would happen? I add in a quantity here. So the line total is displayed here. And I hit the save button. And I hit the save button. Now, when I hit the save button, what is it that you see? We see the confirmation message, and we see the line getting saved, and we also see the line total as well. Now, the moment line is saved, yes, it is saved with appropriate line total, and the total amount also got updated accordingly. Total amount also got updated accordingly. So you can also pick up invoice 27, and this invoice doesn't have any line. You can also go ahead and add the line here as well. Otherwise, you can create an invoice from scratch as well. Create an invoice. You can go ahead and pick up a date, save it. And on top of that invoice 46 was created. You pick that invoice. There are no lines at the moment. You can go ahead and add a line. Let's say I need ultra power server. I need quantity 2. So it's 4,000. You can go ahead and add another line. Let's say I added our license fees. Quantity 1. So the total is 1,000. Save it. Now you see the total is 5,000. So the line total is also updated accordingly. Now, the moment you put in a discount here, 2 more minutes, guys, we'll be done with the session. The moment you put in a discount percentage here, we want this discounted amount value also to get updated accordingly. So the moment I put in 10%, I should see 4,500 here. Remember, there was a calculation logic on the discounted amount field, right? But that calculation logic will get fired only when you hit the save button. Until you hit the save button, it doesn't get fired. Now you go ahead and edit the invoice again. You see it is 4,000. Now, if I make it 20%, ideally, it should be 4,000, right? Now, when would it become 4,000? Only after you hit the save button. Now, would user agree to it, guys? If you say that, boss, whenever you make change in the discount percentage, you need to hit the save button to see the updated discounted amount. He would not be happy with it, right? He would say, Prasad, I want this value to change in line with this value. So what are we going to do? We would do the exact same thing that we did on the create line page as well. So we're going to write an expression here. At the moment it is binded to the discounted amount field. We will take it off and we're going to hook it up with an expression. And what's the expression that I'm going to put in? I'm going to put in this expression. So I say, yes, check if invoice and discount is not equal to undefined. So I check if both invoice and discount has a value. And if yes, then we would do a total amount into 1 minus discount percentage. Then we do a total amount into 1 minus discount. So if discount is not null, so do that formula calculation, exactly the same formula that we had in the discounted amount field. Otherwise, if discount is null, display the total amount itself as a discount amount. Okay, so copy this expression, put it in here. You go ahead and launch it. So now that you have changed the discounted amount to a display only field or with the help of an expression, we should be able to see the value getting changed. So as I increase or decrease the discount percentage, you see, as I increase or decrease the discount percentage, you see this value also changes. Now you go ahead and hit the save button. Okay, so this way you can go ahead and edit the expressions as well. And in the backend, remember, I changed this to an expression, right? In the backend, I don't need to make any change here because the discounted amount already had a formula logic in place. Now, what is it that I want to do now, guys? I want to, so we've created this Vbcs app, right? Now, I want to show you how to send invoice from Vbcs to ERP Cloud first. Yes, as part of end-to-end flow, we need to create an approval process and call it from Vbcs app. But before I before I show you this flow, I want to show you how to send the invoice from Vbcs to ERP Cloud. And we'll see this as a first thing tomorrow. So I'm going to add a submit button here. And in the submit button, we would be adding the required logic. we would be adding the required logic in the submit button action chain. So how complex it is going to be, guys? So this is the action chain that we're going to add tomorrow. So we will add a button called submit on the line page. And when user on the edit invoice page, and when user hits the submit button, we want to implement this logic to send the AR invoice from Vbcs to ERP directly. So how to add the submit button and how to plug in this logic into the action chain, we'll see this in tomorrow's session. And once we understand how this flow works, we would go ahead and start talking about PCS. Any questions, guys, from anyone? Thank you, guys. See you tomorrow.